What you're about to hear is pretty much what we all would dream of a big gaming CEO saying, and it's this.
Our approach to MTX has slowly eroded the integrity of RuneScape.
Now, those are the words of Jagex CEO John Bellamy, and he admits that their monetization was actually killing the game, that players were leaving because of it, and that revenue was dropping because of that. So Jagex have done something largely unprecedented for the industry at large, but actually fairly normal for them, and fairly smart. They put it to a vote. They let 100,000 players decide the entire future of their monetization model with a single vote, albeit one that was slightly rigged, but not necessarily in a dastardly way. And what those players chose will change RuneScape forever. Back in July, RuneScape's leadership admitted something shocking. Quote, "We have lost players to the way we approach microtransactions." Basically, people were sick of feeling nickeled and dimed, and Jagex's own data actually proved players were quitting over this. The January subscription survey that happened then scared everyone. The idea of $350 Canadian annual subscriptions was fairly spooky, because there was context that nobody could ignore. Jagex had just sold for $1.1 billion to a new group of venture capital firms. That was double their previous sale price. The CEO got replaced, some odd things happened, Pride content was cancelled, there were layoffs, projects were paused, and people kind of thought, oh dear, will there be the usual in-shitification? And when the 2024 financials came out, those painted a dire picture of their first revenue drop in years. But not just that, it was also their first profit drop in years. And the reason was that subscription revenue was falling. And one thing became obvious to everyone, including Jagex. They simply could not continue like this. Now, you may remember those AI regulation battles we've been tracking on the channel. Well, when tech is meeting copyright law and all the different outlets are spinning these stories differently, it can be a nightmare where you can only be seeing part of the story. And that's where Ground News comes in. They're today's sponsor, they're awesome, and take a look at this. It's Udio's settlement with Universal Music. We see that 57 sources covered it, but only 12% right-leaning coverage. So you're missing how this plays politically, and if you are more biased towards right-leaning sources, you're probably going to miss the story entirely. And the headline split reveals everything. Breitbart, who are right-leaning with mixed factuality, announces Universal Music and AI song generator Udio settle lawsuit, announce partnership, which is quite the contrast to AP News, who are rated very high factuality and lead with the impact, saying AI song generator Udio offers brief window for downloads after Universal settlement upsets users. So you can see the difference there. One of them is just talking about a partnership, but the other one is upset users following a settlement. So same story, but different focuses. And this is exactly why I check Ground News daily, and I use it as my own newsfeed. You get the factuality ratings from 3 independent agencies, you get to see the political bias, the ownership structures of the news organizations, and the factuality ratings from 3 independent agencies. And that means you're not seeing spin, you're actually getting a reliable view of the news. And beyond their regional homepages, you can set up the likes of, say, their tech page that will go and capture everything from the copyright battles to the regulation threats, all with bias context. So just go to ground.news/Bellular. That's where you'll get 40% off unlimited access with the Vantage plan. That is the best deal you'll get, and that is the plan that I use. Dire times often require bold action, and that's actually what they did. They announced something radical, a series of live experiments to test new monetization models for RuneScape. Back in July, they shared some research on this, where 42% of active players said that microtransactions ruined the experience. 60% of lapsed players blamed microtransactions for leaving, and 63% said they'd actually return if the microtransactions were fixed. That's huge, as were a lot of the solutions. They tested a lot of things live in the game, like removing the loot box systems, having cosmetic-free worlds, having different purchase models, and ultimately the data had proven one thing quite clearly, that the old model was absolutely dead. Following the experimentation, Jagex unveiled their master plan to let people vote on the future. The vote page, though, had one option. That option was remove treasure hunter, you decide. And on the page, there was one button that said vote yes. That's it. There was no vote no option. There was no way to oppose the changes. Of course, the changes were something everyone wanted, and I don't think anyone would be voting no to removing a lot of the bullshit. But it wasn't a blind vote. Jagex laid out the complete package of proposals, everything they planned to remove, everything they planned to change, and that meant players could see exactly what they were approving. Now, you don't build a voting system in this way for democracy, right? You don't do a vote that you can't say no to because you want to be democratic. You do something like this to build consensus. When you vote yes, you're not signing a contract or anything, but you do have a little bit of buy-in. You've taken some real material action for making these changes, and that will mean people will feel ownership. And that ownership matters, because every player who voted will now want to see these changes succeed. It means they're invested in the outcome. But it's also a practical thing, because Jagex had already ran the experiments, already gathered the data. This vote was essentially rubber stamping decisions already made at a production level. So, it was smart marketing and a practical necessity, and also something that should sound familiar. Jagex ran the same playbook in 2013, the same vote structure, the same design. That time, well, they got 449,351 votes to launch old-school RuneScape. It was kind of framed like crowdfunding, making it a big campaign. Different vote thresholds unlocked more dev resources and commitments. They did fall 50,000 short of the final goal, so they split the difference. And this time, they needed 100,000 votes to proceed. But of course, every vote beyond that just makes the signal bigger to Jagex of how many resources they should commit and how fast they should deliver. And if you care about those things being delivered, the fact that they hit 100,000 in just 24 hours is damn good news. But you may also be wondering, what the hell did people actually vote for? Let's get into Jagex's proposal. First, the complete removal of Treasure Hunter, which was their loot box-like system that required keys for random rewards. And as the CEO Bellamy put it,
our approach to MTX has slowly eroded the integrity of RuneScape. The most egregious elements of our MTX offering are those which enable players to skip core gameplay, missing much of what makes RuneScape special.
Yeah, this stuff was actually materially impacting gameplay. So now, that whole thing is gone. Second, the removal of 225 pay-to-win items. Basically, anything that improves XP gains, anything that skips core gameplay, anything that lets you buy progress. That's all gone. As for what survives, well, only cosmetics and limited bonus XP. Now, those cosmetics will change based on the experiments, but the good news is, they're probably not going to be extreme. Jagex say their goal is to make them feel, quote, grounded and always true to the visual identity of Gielinor, which means no immersion-breaking microtransaction items. And I'm happy to say that is quite the theme in this year's news cycle, and a very welcome one, because it's been a rot on the IPs that we love. Now, the bonus XP survives in a way that Jagex calls limited and healthy, and will still require actual gameplay, where it's essentially capped per skill. And here's why it survived. 54% of surveyed players actually wanted to keep some sort of progression-friendly option. Okay, third then, a year-long integrity roadmap. Yeah, an integrity roadmap. Not something we usually hear of. Now, this is separate from content updates, and it's focused on fixing UI, onboarding, and XP progression. All good stuff, and all non-microtransaction related problems that were making the game harder to enjoy. Fourth then, and this is a huge one, optional cosmetic toggles, where players will eventually be able to disable certain visual customizations they don't like. Imagine jumping into a Call of Duty lobby and saying, I want this to feel like it's a military-inspired game and not some sort of bizarre sci-fi brand thing. Kinda crazy. I'm sure it's something that Activision would like to sell you. Anyway, the framing does matter here because all of these changes happen alongside content updates, meaning that nobody in theory loses out. And that's big, because often content is the main casualty of big pivots like this in live services. An obvious example being Helldivers. It had to trade content for making performance and balance improvements. Jagex, though, are committing to both, and I think there's an obvious reason why. A shitload of money is on the line. We will see reduced revenue from microtransactions, and we have total support to take that hit. That's a quote from Jagex. It's from their head of community, and it is brutally honest. They say overtly they're choosing trust over immediate profit. That is what you love to hear, and if you look at the numbers, it does actually make sense. You see, microtransaction revenue is already down 5 million in 2024, only making up 23 million in total, which is a hell of a lot less than their subscription revenue of 119 million. So, microtransactions were just a fifth of subscription income, but they were so distasteful, they were damaging subscription income. they were also shrinking. What's clear is that subscriptions are RuneScape's lifeblood, and with those numbers in mind, this actually does not look like an insane gamble. Yes, it is large, and it's not guaranteed to work, but if big results are the goal, then I think this is a sane gamble. And it's also the same model that made old school RuneScape the success it is. Focus on subscriptions and happy customers, make cosmetics optional, not predatory. And honestly, there's nothing better from a game designer's perspective, because when a sub fee is being paid for a live service game, then the incentives of the player and the developer are aligned, as opposed to the oppositional bullshit of ramming the microtransactions down our throats. Now, the promise here is simple, quote, an era-defining shift for RuneScape, where achievements are based on merit, not spending. So what it is a long-term play that requires nerve, and perhaps more importantly, requires their venture capital owners to actually be patient whilst the revenues temporarily drop. So, it's a good bet, but it's one that hinges on one question. How many voters are current subscribers versus lapsed players? Because current players being happy is a good thing, but Jagex will need to get those lapsed players back, and ideally subscribing. Now, the vote ends November 12th. Anyone with a Jagex account can still participate, and if this works, RuneScape will become the anti-microtransaction haven. I guess a subscription-focused alternative, something that is choosing healthy profit with their players over just gouging out as much money as is humanly possible, as quick as is possible. And I think, as an example for the whole industry, that would be amazing. It would be something for us to all rally around. But if it doesn't, if the subscription growth doesn't offset the losses, well, that is when we'll find out how much, quote, total support from their venture capital owners actually means. Because what happens when they see revenue drop? When quarterly targets get missed. It could be quite bad, though there are at least a few reasons to suspect their new owners may not be the worst in the world. They actually seem to have a fair bit of game industry experience now brought in. They've done things with Take-Two, and, well, they even slurped up Kerbal Space Program 2. Maybe they'll try and fix it up. I don't exactly know. As for this, Jagex is betting everything on a single principle: that happy players will spend more and play more than frustrated players. And thus far, over 100,000 people have just said that they agree. Now, we'll just have to see if they are right. And I'll tell you what this story is. It's the opposite of the bullshit shenanigans covered in this next story, where, well, Snoop Dogg slop is the future of Amazon gaming, it seems. That's all happening in a world where